Welcome, dear Dr. Osman Latif. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
You're welcome. Assalamu alaikum to you all.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Before we start, because our audiences are mostly Afghans and they may not be familiar with you, can you please introduce yourself and your education background so our audience know who we are talking to and they have a background of our guest?
Yeah. Well, Bismillah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa barik wa sallam. I was born in the UK and I have a special interest in the Crusades. My degree, in fact, is in history and my master's is in Crusader studies. So I look at the onset of the Western incursion into the Muslim world, particularly into Al-Quds in Jerusalem, and the settlement of Crusaders in those spaces. And then I did my PhD, my doctorate on the Muslim response to the Crusade. So I look at the importance of poetry and books of fadail, of virtues, of Al-Quds, of Damascus, and how the Muslims used those books to inspire the Muslims to fight, for their homeland and to fight for liberation of Al-Quds. And then after my PhD, I did a postdoctorate on something very different, very different. In fact, it's more in line with our topic today about dehumanization and othering, and the way that media narratives frame a people in a particular way, and the way that like conscious objectors, people have used their own new media, social media, to undercut and to rewrite the false history of a people. And so I look at like a range of topics in that. Of course, the postdoc is very different to history because it's more like sociology. But I look at the role of images, iconography, suffering, narratives building up of that, poetry, songs, all sorts of things, even like movies, script writing, and how that creates this other in imagination of people. So, and then I work full time for Sapiens Institute, which is a very remarkable institute across the world, mashallah. Where we have bases in England and America and Spain and other countries as well. And the whole purpose is to encourage Muslims to become confident as du'at and giving dawah, and to help Muslims who have difficulties in Islam because of so many new phenomenon of liberalism, secularism, LGBTQ stuff, and all these things. And we try and help Muslims deal with those things and train them, and train du'at and imams in different capacities. So that's my full-time work, and may Allah put barakah in all things, inshallah. And I also write many things. I have 6 published books, and I write almost every day about things. And I have my first fiction books written to inspire Muslim children, because a lot of our children are reading books with inherent un-Islamic messages about them within them, like magic and other things. And I wanted to write fiction also as a side project to help Muslim children overcome these things, because those books that I write will have, inshallah, more Islamic identity-based virtues in them, about iman and courage and sabr and so on and so forth. So that's the work that I do.
May God give you more blessings and more barakah in your work. Sir, if for the first question, actually, our nation is, speaking of dehumanization and otherization, is more dehumanized and otherized by Western media, especially, and I mean Afghan nation. So I wanted to ask, when you first hear the name Afghanistan and our nation, what comes to your mind, and how the people in the West see our nation, mostly from the media and the narratives that they have created throughout the years?
Yeah. I think there is a good question you asked, because it's about the way that a name captures stereotypes of a people. And it's true with Afghanistan and also other places as well. One of the things that taps into my work is I look at like Liberia. Liberia in 1990s was underwent a lot of hostility. You had mass rape and mass killing in Liberia. But not many people know about Liberia and the suffering and the works of Asatu and Gabawi and these very famous names and how they overcame this and taught the importance of empathy in overcoming othering of those people. But the point is that because you have these two framings of worthy victims and unworthy victims, that means that even though people suffer and they struggle in life, and you have wars and you have all these things, not everyone is worthy enough to make it into a Western media framing. And this is in many, many things. So one of the things, of course, is when you have what's called the child missing syndrome. When a child goes missing, it's more likely that you will have public interest in the story if the child happens to be white as opposed to black, for example. Yeah, so color therefore has a complexion in that, and you have more interest, more money donated if the child happens to be white as opposed to a darker skinned ones. And likewise, for example, if you go back in time and you think about Native Americans and Native Indians, you have people whose lands were taken from them. There was stolen lands and there was mass injustice, but not everyone is in the frame of being remembered in this. And this is what makes the importance of us retelling the stories and reimagining the stories so important. One of my books, in fact, I wrote is called Navigating Wars and Empathy that you spoke about in the beginning. And in the book, I have a chapter about a girl called Abir
Yes.
Qasim Hamza Jalabi, who was killed in Iraq, and she was raped and she was killed, and her family was all killed in Iraq by American soldiers, and they were caught in 2004 or 5, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, now I go through the surviving images of the room in which Abir was killed, and there's only maybe one or two surviving images of that room, but the room is empty. It has no furniture, no like things that show this to be a bedroom, no bed, for example. And what it does is in imagination, it shows the person exists in a space, but the space is unlike our own space, different to our space. So we imagine, for example, bedrooms and rooms and furniture and closets and wardrobes and cupboards and, and beds. Like we normalize our existence through these objects. Now, when those things don't exist, what it does is it puts the person or that framing of the narrative into an othered perspective. That's something different, because that person is not the same as us. That person is living different to us. And it's interesting because you mentioned one of the chapters I have, in fact, in the book is about Iraq, and I look at a woman called Anja Nydring Horse, who was a war journalist killed in Afghanistan. She was killed by mistake in Afghanistan, reporting on the war in Afghanistan, and during that, and also in Iraq. But she was a war correspondent that was working for an independent journalist. So she was not tapping into a Western media outlet. But it's remarkable because I used her photographs in my book, even though she's passed away. So I had to go to another agency to have access to her photograph because I couldn't appeal to ask her directly. And but in the photograph, she tries to rehumanize the image of Afghanistan, of people in Afghanistan and in Iraq, like the kind of image that you wouldn't see. For example, she tries to show that these are human beings like you, for example. And that's really what it means to dehumanize someone. It means to relegate them, to marginalize them, to put them into a corner different to your one. As long as you can show differences, then that person is going to be othered. And I think that when it comes to Afghanistan, because people like conceptualize Afghanistan like maybe as a distant land, as a land of war, of suffering, of otherness, of where things don't seem to work, for example. And it's interesting that when I wrote about this, not Afghanistan directly, but about Iraq, because I showed images doing a contrast study between American school shootings and the war in Iraq in 2007, a long time ago. In American school shootings, you always have images of people crying and grieving, but they're always grieving collectively.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have their head on the shoulders of other people, or they embracing people? And it shows a collective framing of mourning. But in Iraq, you don't see this.
Yeah.
Or maybe in Afghanistan, you don't see this. Yeah, you
Yes.
don't see the collective element. You don't see people together mourning. In fact, what you see a narrative framing that simply agrees with the stereotypical images. So, for example, in Iraq, you see a person crying, but you see something burning in the background, or you see smoke coming from a tire burning, for example. You see something that agrees with a stereotypical image already created.
Mm-hmm.
That images simply agree with an already built up narrative about those people. And I think that that's what happens in Afghanistan and elsewhere as well, you know.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. Speaking of the dehumanization, you have written a lot about otherization. Can you briefly explain what otherization is and how it starts and how it develops?
Yeah, so othering is like a mechanism of dehumanization. It's a mechanism. It's the way that you have different strands that make a person at the end not fully human.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes that happen is one is called social death or social dying. When you relegate a people to the margins, like for example, if you say a people are uh, are uh, or
Mm-hmm.
criminals, or they're all like or they smell different to us, or they look different to us, or they wearing different clothes to us. Like you have to use something to create the distance. Something. It could be anything. It could be clothing. It could be a look. It could be nose size. One of my chapters I have in the book I wrote called On Being Human. The last chapter is about Rwanda. So I look at the genocide of Rwanda
Yeah.
in 1994, and I speak about the way that you have these two tribes, Hutus, Tutsis, and the Hutus are killing the Tutsis, and then the plane crashes carrying the president of Rwanda, Burundi, and the Tutsis then they make a revenge attack against the Hutus. Um, but remember that they're both African people, and they're all Christians, and all it is that there's a small difference that the militias picked up on, and they use this framing to create this distance othering. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
like a nose size or a hair color or a face complexion. Like there has to be something that you pick up on that reflects the distance, and if you do that, then you've captured attention. You create the monster around you, and that's what happens. So it's about how do you make the monster? What you need to do to create the image of that monster. And I think it's true when it comes to Afghanistan, for
Yes,
example.
yes, yes.
In the West, people might look at, for example, the turban or the beard, for example, and they might make a narrative about this. Yeah, they might say this person looks different to us, for example. He's not in compliance with Western standards, for example. And all you do is pick up on something small and then enlarge the framing of it,
Mm-hmm.
make it bigger than it actually is. And each person, adds to this. There's a very good book by Harper Lee called To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a very famous book that's studied in schools, or used to be at least, not anymore. Maybe it's an American author, and Harper Lee wrote about like 1930s America when you had the Great Depression, and you had loss of income, and all these things. But there's a society called Macomb County, and in that society, a county, no one has a job. So all the women, they just sit around and they talk all night, all day long. And there's a black person, Tom Robinson, living on in the village, and what they do is that they make up stories about him. Yeah, because they have time on their hands because they have nothing else to do. They just talk about things, and each one is adding to the. So maybe he's this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe that, and they're all adding to it. They're all adding their own flavor to it. At the end, he emerges as a non-human, like he's a non-human person, and then of course labeling anything against him, like maybe he's a murderess, he's a villainous, he's a rapist, thief, is easy because you build up the image of this other. So othering, therefore, is from that perspective. Now, at the end of it, you're going to have different things. Like one of the things is zoomorphism, where you make the person an animal. An animal. For example, like you find sometimes I think it was Bush who used words like that, like take the rats out of the caves or something like that, and he was referring to Afghanistan, in back in the day. So and words are used like that quite often.
Trump is also using derogatory words about us a lot of times. Yeah,
that's right. Like calling them rats or vermin or cockroaches, that. You see them as an infestation that has to be cleansed from society. And how do you cleanse them? You kill them. You kill them all. That would cleanse the society of them. So once you make the image, it's easy to mold the image, relevant to context and to people, expectations, relevant. It's easy to mold that image of the other into your own, into your. And by the way, the other emerges from the self. Yeah. So one thing we forget is that the other is a contrast to the self. So what that means is that the self first must exist in order for us to create the other. If you see yourself as perfect, as holy, as righteous, then the other must be your opposite. Must be that the other is imperfect, unholy, unrighteous. Yeah. And so the other is a contrast to you. However you are is how your other is going to be. You're going to make the other as a contrast to you. So if you're righteous, he must be the unrighteous one. It's a very good book by a woman called Susan Faludi, called The Third Dream, and she writes about 9/11, and she says that when you have like wars launched in Iraq and Afghanistan, people in America, because they might be themselves bad people, like maybe drug dealers or murderers or rapists, but as long as they see someone else who is worse than them, that gives them consolation. It validates their own existence, because all it takes is for them to know that there are other people out there in the world who are worse than them, and that's the image built up about Afghanistan and people of Afghanistan or Iraq or other places. As long as you have that image, then it makes the self image, validated.
You spoke about a lot about otherization, but what I took from the book, that it somehow wants to remove the boundaries between us and them. I mean, in practically speaking, in the world of us, we have to have some us and them. Like we are Muslims, they are Christians, we are Jews. What would be the word beyond us and them?
Sorry, what would be the world?
Yeah, the world beyond us and them. I mean, the world which everything is universalized. Humans are all the same. There is no identity boundaries.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I wrote an article recently, just a few weeks ago, published on Islam 21C, about the way that the Zionists in Israel are giving the Druze Christians in Lebanon a threat, not to hide Muslims in their homes. Not to hide Muslims in their homes. And I wrote an article about this, about the way that you have this tragic irony of history, because once upon a time Muslims, they hid the Jews in their homes.
Yes.
In in so many places, we gave them safe refuge. And of course, this is the reversal of history.
Even in Rwanda, the Muslims helped the Hutus and Tutsi both.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we disguised them as Muslims. We gave them prayer beads and headscarf and opened the masajid for them, and people have safety. And this is true a lot. So, for example, in Islam, we don't buy into a complexion of us and them on grounds that they use,
Mm-hmm.
like they use facial complexion or they use ethnicity or color of skin. And Allah in the Quran says, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ. It's from the signs of Allah. Allah made you like that. Allah made you different like that.
Mm-hmm.
These are from the signs of Allah. لِتَعَارَفُوا, so you would recognize each other in this. And Allah made you shaba'il. Allah made you different nations and tribes. So you recognize each other. Not so that you would live in perpetual enmity with each other, no. But they see it different because their worldview is an un-Islamic, non-Islamic one based upon liberal secular values. Now, in this, what happens is that there is one type that's more deserving, more better than the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be, for example, we have color of skin like black people during civil rights struggle when black people were marginalized and you had segregation and you had apartheid and you had bathrooms or toilets for white people and ones for black people and you had restaurants for white people and restaurants for black people. You had this separation of man and from each other. Why? Because you're picking up on a small thing. Now when this happens, because you spoke about like what's the world outside of this framing. Now, let me give you an example. Like one of the things that Salahuddin al-Ayyubi did when the Catholic Christians in the First Crusade, they killed the Muslims and they expelled the Jews. Yeah, and Jews were not allowed to live in Jerusalem. But when Salahuddin came back after 88 years and retook Al-Quds, he invited Jews back into Jerusalem. Like you're allowed to live back where you were living before. So and likewise in Spain in Andalus, when the Muslim armies went into Andalus in 711, Tariq bin Ziyad and Musa ibn Nusayr arrived in that space. The Jews were a victimized minority because the Catholics they forced them to be baptized, forced conversion, forced expulsion, and the Muslims gave those people rights. So when it comes to minorities, whether they're Jews or other people, it's about recognizing that the space, the social space that they inhabit, they allow to exist in that space. Like that space is allowed to exist for them. The Muslims, for example, in the treaties of Theodomir or in the Pact of Omar, or even in the Treaty of Medina, were not allowed to destroy synagogues or
Yes.
churches. They had to let those things survive for people to simply live. There's a very famous line of a man called W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Soul of Black Folk, and one of his lines in his book is in Latin. It says, dum vivimus vivemus," which means, while we live, let us live.
Mm-hmm.
While we live, let us live. And it's quite profound like that. So,
Mm-hmm. Before going to the more deeply to the dehumanization aspects, uh, can you explain what is human and what distinct qualities makes us human? I mean, what are the fundamentals of being a human?
so Allah in the Quran says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي Adam.
Mm-hmm.
We have given nobility to sons of Adam. That means every person who has life, who is breathing, who has life, is worthy,
Mm-hmm.
has a space, and that's something that's not I give or you give, but Allah gives a person that sense of nobility. Now that person is, the Prophet says everyone is born upon fitrah. Fitrah means his inherent nature, disposition of man that we recognize like good and bad, and we recognize Allah, and different layers they can impede upon that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have different like social status or bad parenting or friendship circle. All of these things can cloud the fitrah state and make the human a bad person. So we have, of course, demarcations in the Quran about those who are righteous, those who are not righteous, those who are mu'mineen, those who are kuffar, those who are believers, disbelievers. We have tawheed, we have shirk, we have all these demarcations of man because people choose a path different to what Allah intended them to inhabit and to exist in. But what happens is that the human being in themselves, like for example, because we're speaking about people who are dehumanized, that means another people have taken something from them, a small difference, and made it so big that person is no longer deserving of life, has to be killed, has to be imprisoned, has to be subjugated, and so the human being is not like the one of the beautiful things about the Prophet of Islam is that there were people in Medina, one man who was fully blind, he couldn't see nothing, and the Prophet would say to Sahaba, come, let's see the man from Banu Waqif, where the man was from, who is al-Basir, who can see, who is al-Basir, who was full sight. And even though he was fully blind, and the ulama, they say, is because the Prophet was not saying, the Prophet, even though he was fully blind, his heart was awake, his heart could see. And the Prophet therefore transformed the meaning that people give to people, because otherwise you could have a victimization, othering of people who are blind in society, people who are like lepers, people who can't walk properly. But the Prophet transformed the meaning. Yeah, there was one man called Amr ibn al-Jamuh, who was in Battle of Uhud, and his sons went to fight in the battle, and he was left by himself, and he couldn't walk properly. This man, he had a problem with walking. One of his legs was messed up, and then he went to fight in the battle, and he was killed in the battle. And the Prophet passed by him, and he says to him, I see you in your rakat, tamshi brijlik, I see you walking with this healthy leg of yours in Jannah. I can see you walking with healthy leg of yours, meaning it transformed the meaning. When the Prophet went to, when the Prophet was in migrating to Medina from Mecca, he met two people who were like hiding out, and the Prophet asked, "Who are you?" And they said, "We are the wretched, dishonorable ones." And they became Muslim, and the Prophet said, "You are the honorable ones." There was one girl who was called Asiya, as in the disobedient, sinful one, and the Prophet then says, "Your name is now Barira, like your righteous one." There's one tribe called the tribe of Dalala, of misguidance, and the Prophet says, "You're not called the tribe of Huda, of guidance." So the Prophet therefore transformed the meaning of people. There's very famous cases of like the way the Prophet treated people who are like Julaybib, the companion who didn't have much, and he was ostracized. He was no one liked him because of how he looked and all these things. But the Prophet spent time with him, and the Prophet showed him empathy and compassion, and it transformed the meaning that people place on people in his situation. And Zahir and Julabib are people like that. So I think that the way that we deal with people makes a big difference to how those people are framed in the world that we inhabit.
In your book, sir, you talk about landscapes and different landscape and landscaping. Can you please elaborate for our audience that what exactly that means and how it affects the process of dehumanization?
Yeah. So one of my chapters in my book I wrote is called Landscaping Otherness and Challenging Frames of Nothingness in Contemporary Palestine.
Yes.
And I spoke about the fact that sometimes it's not the people, it's the land in which they inhabit. The land is othered. The land is dehumanized almost, yeah. Because what happens is that I give you one example. When you had photographers going from the Western world into Africa in the 18th century, I think, or they would take photographs, captions, or paint pictures of Africa as a continent. But what they would do is that they would project Africa as a darkened space, darkened. So not a space made up of dark people, but of a dark space itself. The space itself is darkened. So in people's imagination, that land is made up of other people who live in an othered space. The space itself is othered. And what I did is that in that chapter, I went through a very, very, very important documentary called The People and the Olive. Everyone should watch this. It's about these global activists around the world who all gathered in occupied Palestine, and they run, marathon runners. They run and they meet Palestinian farmers, and they plant seeds of trees, olive trees in Palestine. And but what it does is it creates new spaces. So it transforms the space. Yeah, they call new sites of resistance in Palestine. And then, for example, sometimes the olive trees should be growing for like hundreds of years of growth of olive trees are named after the activists, and then it's like very emotional, and people begin to cry and all these things. But what it does is it shows that the space, because I look at like ecological motifs, like ecology, like the way that simple stuff like planting and water and just grass, simple stuff can transform perception of a landscape. And this is very important because otherwise, remember, like it's like Afghanistan, for example. Now, people might know about the Afghani people, maybe, but not enough about the land itself. What makes the land important to the people? Like what cultural identity in the land is important for the people? Identity in the land important for the people. Maybe there are, like, for example, people all know about monuments in the West, like Statue of Liberty or all these Niagara waterfalls, all these things, because they attribute the land to the people. But maybe we have to do more of that, and showing why the land is important itself, not just the people living in the land. It's a bit like, for example, when you have al-Quds. Al-Quds. Now, one of the things that Muslims began to do when al-Quds was captured by the Crusaders is that they began to not to speak about the people living in the land that you have to rescue and save, but why the land is important is because Allah placed virtue in the land. Uh, the land is made up of Sahaba who lived in the land, who died in the land. People all these things about the virtues of the space transform the perspective of the space itself. Otherwise, what happens is that the people who have bad intention will dehumanize the people and the land on which they live, and that becomes a double tragedy. One of the things that I wrote about in the chapter on Abir, and the chapter is called the Mahmoudiyya killings and the framing of Abir. So it's about they killed the whole family, but I wrote about a thing called cultural conventions. So what happens is that the American media, what they did is that Abir was 14 years old. Yeah, 14 years old. They had it as 25 years old for months. All the main newspapers for months had it as 25 years old. Now it's different when a 25-year-old woman is raped and murdered, and a 14-year-old child is raped and murdered. Its complexion is different. Perspective is different. And then I spoke about the way that there's no in the narrative of that killing when it comes in small places in some newspapers in America and inside, like, so you're gonna find it hard. There's no mention of how the killing would affect her society, her culture, her uncle or her grandparents, or there's no cultural conventions available. Yeah, people only see one family in isolation and don't see, like, for example, Afghanistan, you have cultural codes, right? Symbolic codes, cultural codes. And it could be, for example, that one thing happens and it affects society because that's against culture.
Yes.
Like we call it in literature, we call it transgressive. It could be, like, for example, something someone doesn't, but it breaks a social moral order of what's happening, and that's a transgressive act. So now it wouldn't people in the West wouldn't be able to understand that because they're not aware of the social codes available or existing in places like Afghanistan, for example.
One of the concepts that's new with the Muslim world. It's nationalism. It came after the modern Western civilization came to Muslim lands. And this nationalism is very much helping Muslim people to dehumanize other Muslims. And it's a great problem. How do you see nationalism in helping the dehumanization? And how can we, as a Muslim people, as a Muslim ummah, cope with the side effects of nationalism in our ummah?
Yeah. So the first thing is to remember that Allah made us an ummah. In Ummatun Wahida, Allah made you a single unified nation, and Allah give you a single unified worship of your Lord who is one. When Rabbukum fattaqun, I'm your Lord, so Allah says, have taqwa of me or worship me. Nationalism is coming from as an American project because it comes across about after the First World War ends, then you have nation states building up. So what happens is that these nations, even Afghanistan, for example, Pakistan or the Middle East, become carved up by Western powers, and they carve up the states, and they give each one a kind of a autonomy. They say you are important in yourself, and you have a flag, and you have an anthem, and these two things show self-importance. Now, when a nation becomes like that, it becomes distinct and detached from the outside world, and it has its own flag, its own anthem, it will see itself as self-superior. It will make itself seem as if it's the best thing on earth. Its borders define it, surround it, almost like imprison it. And this what happens. So it's a disease. It's a sickness and disease of the ummah. You have nationalism, that people think themselves as being better than others because of the small confined space that they live in. And of course, remember that it's not the fact that Allah is approving of these borders. These are the Western, policymakers, colonizers who have defined your land for you. And then, of course, for years on end, you sit on this small piece of land and you define it as your own. And that's something that creates this sense of animosity and distance with other people. Remember that dehumanization is not just a physical distance, it's an emotional distance. I'll give you an example. Let's say, for example, white people in America, let's say, or in England, whatever, Europe, could empathize more with white people in Australia, even though it's so far apart, than they could with darker skinned people who are near to them. Near to them. So you could have more relatability with people who are further afield in demographics, that cultural distance, more than you could have with those who are close to you and they have proximity to you. So it's not about our land. There's a very good book. There's a very good poem by called "The Flag" by John Clare, and it speaks about the flag. And the man asks in the poem, he says, "What's that fluttering in the breeze?" And then he's told, "It's a flag, my friend." And he says, "The flag will outlive the blood you bleed. It will outlive the blood you bleed. So you will die, and the flag will still be there."
Yeah.
You will die. You will die for the flag. You will die for the flag, and the flag will still be there, and you will die. And you're dead, but the flag is still there. So it's like this. It's a very good poem, but it's another poem by a man called Wilfred Owen, called "Dulcet Decorum Est Propter Tremori," and he was he was in the First World War, but he was very much against the war, and he died in the war, sadly, tragically. But he wrote a poem in the war, in the trenches, and one of his poems is about this, about the fact that there's a deceit of man, because he thinks that he's fighting for something, even though there's no value in that thing. And he says that if you could see someone dies in the war, and he says if you could see the wagon that we flung him in. So he's saying that all the conceptions people have of people of soldiers who are like honored in war is doesn't exist in the war because that person becomes useless as utility, as someone who has no virtue, no value. So I think that we have to because nationalism is a disease. It's a disease of the heart, of the mind, of the state, and it's incumbent upon us as Muslims to rid ourselves of all of these temporary boundaries that do nothing except divide us further. The Prophet says that one of the things he said on the Khutbatul Wada, the last sermon in the Hajj, he says that kullukum min Adam wa Adam min turab, all the way from Adam. Adam was from dust.
Yes.
He says that your blood and your wealth and your honor is haramun alaykum ka hurmati yawmikum hada fi shaykum hada, like the value of this day, of this month. Like you have to see each person as inviolable because Allah made them inviolable. Like Allah made them sanctified. Not that you have more virtue and value based upon the country you're from, or from the landscape you're in, or from the color you are, or from these complex. No, all of these things are superficial. Superficial things that fade away and you will die and nothing will mean anything anymore. But the main thing is to hold on to the identity Allah gave us as a single ummah, not to be divided by these things that seek to divide us. So.
One of the beautiful concepts, or a new concept for me, was you spoke in your book, the social debt, which the dehumanizers condemn you to social debt before a physical debt. Can you please elaborate on the concept of social debt and what it is, how it starts, and how it affects the dehumanizer and the victims?
Yeah. So I spoke about social death and dying. I think I have. I can't remember. But I think it's in light of the Holocaust and the Jewish suffering, and the fact that you have relegation of a people. So once the people are living in society, let's say, for example, you deny some people jobs in society. Now that's the beginning of a social death. They haven't died as yet, but socially, they're not with you. They're not there anymore. But they're not dead as yet. They're still there, but they're not socially with you. Or, for example, you deny people access to your social spaces like the masjid. There was a man who once urinated in the masjid. He urinated in the masjid. And Sahaba were really angry with this man. And the Prophet said, leave him, let him finish. And then the Prophet brought a bucket of water and cleaned the urination. And the man went back into the row. He says, I testify he is Rasul of Allah. فَإِنَّهُ لَمْ يُؤَنِّبْ وَلَمْ يُصُبْ, because he didn't abuse or curse me. So now imagine, for example, people who have a problem or who are like elderly or something, we deny them access to our social spaces. That's the beginning of a social death. Now in time, that class of people will become othered. Like other people, like maybe our children would see them as different. And I spoke about people who are like using walking sticks or on wheelchairs, or people who are like can't see properly. Or what it means is that if you have a social death culture, it means you're not giving people the same value and scale as you would give to other people. That culture will grow over time, and then they will be the victims of othering and dehumanization because you've already killed them. They've already died, but they've died in your imagination. The society has killed them off, and this is why it's very important that there was one man who was out of Medina called Zahir, and he was poor person, and he would sell some stuff on the floor. And the Prophet once came behind him and he put his hand over his eyes. And it's a beautiful moment in this hadith. And the Prophet says that Zahir is our village. We are his city. We're his Medina city. He's our village. Meaning the Prophet showed connection between these two things, even though demographics and social data is different because one's poor, one's wealthy, one's distant, one's close, but the Prophet brought them close together. And I think we have to do that, because otherwise we run the risk of creating this culture where we create these people who are socially dead in society. Like, that's why the Prophet encouraged visiting the sick and the elderly, and to be, with those who are like, to help. The Prophet once says that, "لَإِنْ أَمْشِي مَعَ أَخٍ فِي حَاجَتِهِ," for me to walk with my brother in his need is more beloved to me than spending the whole month in the itikaf. Like, to walk with my brother in his need.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people should see that. People should see that the people who are like marginalized because they have less, or they're unable or disabled, are still included in that framework. And it's like, for example, in our walimas, in our kids get married, it's encouraged to invite the poor people
Mm-hmm.
to the walima, not just the wealthy people. To invite the poor people, to invite people who people don't invite, but you invite them, because if you don't, it would create more a social dying culture, where in time the people you haven't invited are going to become even more marginalized society, and one day othered and dehumanized. And so I spoke about these things, in my book.
Even Hazrat Ali Karamullah Wajhu, he was not attending any ceremony that poor people were not included.
This is a good thing. This is a good thing.
Yeah.
This is a good
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Because it shows that you have to always invite poor people,
Mm-hmm.
always invite poor people and elderly people and people who are like handicapped and disabled. Invite them to your gatherings, because it will offset a culture of social
Mm-hmm.
death in our world today.
One of the beautiful definitions which I saw in your book was about empathy, and you defined it. Empathy is to the ability to imagine yourself in place of others. So, how empathy can solve the overgrowing process of otherization and dehumanization, which we see around the world, especially even in Western societies with the rise of far-right groups? How can Islamic empathy and empathy in general can solve this problem?
Yeah, like I'm writing a book at the moment on Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm writing about what's called a found pedagogy of learning. And there are two constructs here, of a lost pedagogy and a found pedagogy. Lost pedagogy is because the Zionists, they destroy all of the universities
Mm-hmm.
and schools and centers of learning. They bomb all the places where people can learn. They just destroy them. They kill all the academics and professors and teachers. But the found pedagogy is a pedagogy without the walls of a school.
Mm-hmm.
The classrooms under the rubble. Like, people still memorize Quran, and for example, there's a teaching element that you learn from forbearance and patience and tawakkul and iman, that people that transports itself in the world. People can see that happening. And then what it does is it creates this culture of empathy. If empathy is, like I mentioned, it's putting yourself in someone else's predicament. There are different strands of empathy. There is empty empathy, where a person might feel sorry for someone, but does nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
That's called an empty empathy. That means that person's like just his instinctive sorrow was for somebody or something, but it wouldn't take him any more than that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have what I call a witness empathy. Now, the witness empathy is the most important empathy, because that means someone will risk their own life to save someone else's life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So all these paradigms of people who resisted, like, for example, in my book, I spoke about Sophia Scholl, this girl from Germany, 1943, who tried to save other people, and she was just German Christian,
Yes.
but she was killed by the Nazis, who was beheaded because she wanted to save people. And likewise, you find many people like that in the world who have this real sense of empathy, witness empathy, and that they're trying to save other people in their predicament. So I begin, if I remember, one of my books by speaking about how the Prophet described a man who went to feed a dog. The man, one narration says, a woman, he had food and drink, and he saw the dog, and the dog was licking the earth, and there was a well, and so the man took his shoe and he put the water in the well, and he gave the dog to drink, and and Allah forgave this man's sins, yeah, because of this act of kindness. And Sahaba, they said, Rasulullah, do we get reward for even like? And the Prophet says that every living thing that you help, there's a reward in that. And this shows the importance of empathy, because the man empathized with the dog. The dog was suffering, same situation as he was in. So you put yourself in that same predicament. Now, there's many ways of doing that, of creating that space. One of the things that I, like in my book, Navigating War, you will see it has, at the end of it, it has pictures in it as well. One of the last chapters I wrote is about motherhood as symbolism, and I wrote about these activists who in America they made themselves look like Arab Iraqi women. They wore the full abaya and the full face covering, everything. They were all actors. They were all actors, yeah. All actors, but they were dressed like Iraqis, yeah. Even though Iraqis don't dress like that fully, yeah. But it was to give a perspective. And then they took these. They went to one of the forests in America, and they collected these twigs and branches and leaves, and they made these dolls of all these babies, yeah. And then they were holding the babies, and they stood outside the cemetery in America, in New York, to give the impression of. And then they had for these babies, they had one picture of a child who was killed in Iraq. So they had stapled on the dolls, on these dolls they made with all these twigs and branches, a child killed in Iraq. The woman, I spoke with her. Her name was E.O. Stubblefield, and I had a great chance of speaking with her on the phone. And I asked her to send me the photos of all these things, because I couldn't find them.
Mm-hmm.
And she was very kind. She sent me the graphically enhanced photographs of the performance, and she was so shocked. She was so shocked that they made this small, like maybe 1 minute documentary in 2004 about the activism, and someone 20 years later is writing a book about the about the about the the
Mm-hmm.
performance. I want to include, and I have a whole chapter on there, and I acknowledge in the book, because that's a profound sense of empathy. Now, she's using whatever capacity she has and they have as actors, but trying to cross the boundaries of othering, dehumanization, to reach a point of empathic concern is really what's so profound.
Mm-hmm.
What has to happen is that we have to retell the stories.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very good book by a man called Rifat al-Arir called Gaza Writes Back, and he was killed in genocide in Gaza. He was killed in the genocide in Gaza. But his book, Gaza Writes Back, is a collection of stories. And what he says is that they're destroying all the universities, schools, so we have to retell the stories. And it's upon us to create the empathy of retelling the narratives, that people should know about the stories of Afghanistan. Who are the storytellers in Afghanistan? What are the voices of Afghanistan? What are the main things? So all this is about rehumanizing.
Mm-hmm.
Rehumanizing, where people have been dehumanized. How do you rehumanize them? Now, this is not to say that there is a inherent need for us to prove humanity. No, that people are humans in themselves,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a need to change a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
To change a narrative. If a narrative is castigating, there's a need for reimagining
Mm-hmm.
the narrative. It's very key for us. So empathy comes from the word in Latin of we have pathos. So empathy is like an in suffering, whereas sympathy is a with suffering. So you have sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is like an instinctive feeling of wanting to help somebody who is in need. And empathy is an in suffering. It means that you put yourself in that situation that person is in, to take them out of that situation that they're in. And there are many examples I mentioned in the book like that, even in Rwanda. For example, I mentioned the example of the Mufti Salih Mana in Rwanda, who gave Muslims this is empathy. This is empathy. And even when they would take canoes into Lake Magosara in Rwanda, and they would find the bodies of all these killed Tutsi people, and if they were found to be killed for helping them, and they would say that we're doing it because of Islam and these things. So it's about, like, even though you might be killed for it, but you realize the social value, the bigger imperative in the Quran and the Hadith about helping somebody who is in need. This transforms, the conceptions of empathy in our lives, because other people are going to be witnessing of it. And there are many examples like I mentioned like that. So I think empathy is one of the I want to tell you a bit of a story. So I wrote I changed my field from history to this focus on othering and dehumanization because of a play that I had access to, that someone was studying, and I had to mark their work. And the play is by a man called the play is by a man called Seamus Heaney, who was an Irish poet, and the play is called Burial at Thebes. And the play is a edition of an old play called Antigone, which is very old, like 3 BC or something. And he wrote this play because there is a king and there's two brothers, and both brothers are fighting in a battle. And one dies fighting for the king, one dies fighting against him. And they have two sisters, Antigone and Ismene. And the king says, whoever tries to bury the brother who was killed is going to be killed. He can't bury the brother who was fighting against him because he's an enemy of the state, treason, treachery. And the one that died fighting for him will be honored, saluted, and prayed for. Anyway, these two sisters and are in this vehicle because Antigone says, we have to bury our brother. So now if she tries to bury him, she'll get killed for it, right? That's the law. But anyway, she says that, but the brother's right to be buried is more worthy. And the whole play is about her brother trying to bury her brother. Now, the author, who's now passed away, Seamus Heaney, rewrote the play, and he says because of the war in Iraq, because of Iraq. Because in our world, there are two types of people. There are those who are worthy, and we will be buried and honored and saluted, and you will have songs for them and pictures for them. And there are others who are not allowed to be buried. You're not allowed to cry for them, not allowed to salute them, nothing. And he wrote this play in part because of the war in Iraq, because he said, because in our world there are these two dimensions in our world. So it's about giving a voice to the voiceless, helping people who are not considered, who are not in the frame of empathy, to become the most important empathized people. I was checking yesterday what points to mention today, and on my phone, Samsung Notes, I found something I wrote 9 years ago, and I have it. If you don't mind, I'd like to read it.
Please.
Because I was shocked that it's still there, subhanallah, but I came across it. And this is a poetic interpretation of a man called Eduardo Galeano, who was from Uruguay, Latin America. And he wrote a book called The Open Wounds of Latin America, because it spoke about political repression and suffering in his context. One of his pieces is called Lasnadis, which means nobodies. And I wrote like an interpretation of this. And I said that the nobodies, nobodied, no ones, exist in a space outside their own. Within them are the fragments of a mimesis, told backwards when they had parents, loved ones, names, art, arms, and faces. The nobodies are the seen, but not those who see, are the tabloid shocking image, but not the images who live in shock-awed, though shocked by our indifference. The nobodies are the ones who spawn the misery between the war photographers, baths, and pre-lunch bears, but not those who really bath and experience fare. They exist outside of us and not within us. The nobodies emerge from broad strokes, painted with white brushes, on our mental canvases. They are no one's outline. The nobodies, though, are somebody's bodies, cited as unknown, corpses when the dust settles, and buried somewhere, but not here. The nobodies are somebodies, but humanity's unwanted, unseen, faceless ghosts in blank spaces of white margins. They gaze at us as we flicker the pages and scroll down. They see us bent double over ourselves, seeking to become somebodies or somebodies. The nobodies are no ones, nobodies and nobodied, but they too live and imagine living. But our gazes seldom meet, and we dare not look hard enough, for in the frame of the other, we notice our own outlines outlined.
Adab.
Yeah.
In Urdu, when we hear a good poetry, we say adab, adab. So it was a very nice one.
Yeah, so I wrote this. It's about our topic today as well.
Yes.
Othering and the nobodies in our world. So yeah.
In the Quran, Allah speaks that we created you in tribes and ethnicities in order to know each other. And you mentioned in your book the story of Ensala, the man whose daughter was cannibalized actually by Belgian people and the rubber companies. That story, when you read it and you see the picture and you know the name of the girl and the name of the father, has a different impact on people when you just a history of a nobody, which you say that very good in your poetry also. So how important do you see the impact of knowledge and knowing other people in preventing the process of dehumanization?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. I'm so grateful that you read the book and you took it seriously. I wrote about this because I wrote about there's two things in this. One is about the importance of Mark Twain. Mark Twain was the champion when the events in Congo were happening and they extracting rubber and ivory, and you have the people who are chopping people's hands off because they couldn't work hard enough in the fields, and they want to take rubber and ivory from the forest. One of the I think he was the finance minister in that time of England felt like something is wrong that we're doing, and he went back and he asked the author Mark Twain for help, like write something about this. And Mark Twain said that it's not like his business. But then when he asked him again, he wrote the book. I have the book on my left somewhere here. It's called King Leopold's Soliloquy. And he wrote this book. It was like to show how horrific and barbaric and horrendous these Belgian colonizers, white people in an African continent are, and the evil they're doing for money. And his book became very important in stopping the injustice against the people of Congo. So it shows the power of literature and the power of words and the power of your efforts in doing that. The second thing is you mentioned the importance of names. I think it's so crucial, and I have a section on this in my book on being human. about the way that Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was a named character.
Yes.
And if you remember, I spoke about this. I spoke about the fact that you have Yusuf, they said, Uqtulu Yusuf, like kill Yusuf, the brothers. And then the one who was more conscious said, La taqtulu Yusuf, don't kill Yusuf. Rather than La taqtuluhu, don't kill him as in pronoun, he names him. And the ulama, they say that because there was still a family connection he had with his brother Yusuf. And so the name carries a lot of weight, a name.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the name has, of course, cultural associations because when you name, like when you name a child, for example, you would ask your own parents about the name, or grandparents, or society approves of the name. Like there's a whole dimension to do with the name. It's not just an abstract naming of a person. The name carries weight, identity, and it's very important for us to know about the names of people, the culture of people, society in which they live, and also about their hopes and dreams
Mm-hmm.
and fears. In my chapter on Abir in the book Navigating War, so Empathy, I wrote about a website called Daily Costs.
Yes.
And Daily Cost was social media. And what it is that they attempted to rehumanize Abir long after she's dead. But they imagine Abir.
Mm-hmm.
They imagine the room. By the way, the picture that has the picture in which the room doesn't exist because no furniture. They imagine the furniture. What if Abir had the furniture? What's the last thing she would be seeing before she was killed, for example? The same things, like I in my book, I have a picture of the Sandy Hook school massacre, and you have a picture of like teddy bears and all these candles and the things that dehumanize the dead people. But the same thing won't exist in other settings. It won't exist because they're not like uh, they're not afforded those things that would humanize children. Yeah, you don't have. And I said in my book, I said we have like Daniel becomes Dan,
Mm-hmm.
but Abir will never become Abi. Abir will never become Abi.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel will become Dan, but not Abir will never become Abi, because Abir can't exist in the Abi humanized association. You can't have Abir becoming the Abi. You can't have that. Won't exist. Even though the Daniel becomes a Dan very easily. Yeah. So, so you have these, like the evil entities would create this complex, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because they need it to make wars, to steal, to colonize. They have to create the dehumanized monster, because without it, those wars wouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
They have to create that complex. But it's upon us, of course, as Muslims, because Allah made us as witnesses to mankind, and we are the best people, nas, taken out for mankind, to reframe this, to fix the damage that people create in dehumanizing, in alienating, in othering, to correct the damage and to give people hope in life in what we do, inshallah.
Inshallah. Also, you spoke about the drone killing and direct killing, and the effects of drone killings are less than the direct killing because they do not see the human themselves. They do not know, and they just see the screen moving.
You don't see it. This is a good point. Remember that in our world today, we have a complex of altitude, attitude. We have altitude
Mm-hmm.
and attitude. With altitude, the height creates distance. So when you have altitude, like for example, if the drone's flying, like I mentioned the point of, like you mentioned, Dave Grossman's book on killing, and he speaks about the fact that, you could have a person flying the F-16 fighter jet, drops a bomb is dropped and hundreds of people being killed. And the schools destroyed, the mosque destroyed, the walls destroyed, the animal, livestock are being killed, everything, but he's miles away. Before he even sees the damage, he's miles away, and he would go home, and he will have McDonald's somewhere else in the world, right? But the one person who kills one person with a knife,
Mm-hmm.
and that person, he has to go through layers of empathy, potential empathy. Like you will see a person pleading for their life, don't kill me. He has to surpass that. A person who is all the mess, all the blood is on him as well. surpass that. The person asking for help, please call ambulance, surpass that. He has to go through all these levels before he sees the dead person, and that's in fact harder for a person to do.
Mm-hmm.
So the it's like, for example, I mentioned the point of like the Nazis, they would have the fans and they would gas the Jews, but the modern day fans are the drones, because the Nazis would say that we're not doing it, but the fans are running, and they would say that we're not doing it, but the drones are flying.
Mm-hmm.
So the drones create the distance that the fans have altitude. The drones are flying, and someone else is in America, Utah, like a computer game, and is killing innocent people in Afghanistan and Pakistan, right? Killing innocent people, right? Blood bombing, but has no sense of care for what he's doing. And that creates this sense of real deep, entrenched, like indifference, like feeding nothingness for the human being that you've killed, because not just killing one person. Allah in the Quran says, وَمَنْ قَتَلَ نَفْسًا قتل الناس جميعا. Whoever kills one, it's like he's killed everybody. ومن أحياها فكأنما أحيا الناس جميعا. If you kill one, you've killed all. So think about it. Now, one of the books on my bookshelf is a very big, thick book called My Little Sister Millie. My Little Sister Millie. And this is a book by a woman called Gemma Dowler. Gemma Dowler. It's about her sister called Millie Dowler. Millie Dowler was killed 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
She was abducted, she was raped, she was killed. But then in time, many, many years later, her older sister, Gemma Dowler, wrote a book about her sister. And she begins her book by saying, like, why she wrote it. He says, I wrote it for my children so that they know the auntie,
Mm-hmm.
who the auntie was. I really felt a deep sense of sorrow for her when I read the words, because even though the auntie was like 15 years old, she was killed when she was young, but it's for the girls to know who the auntie was. So we have to retell the stories and tell them, and tell the names of people and give them the places, and this is why dreams and hopes are very important, because we forget that every child has an aspiration, has a dream,
Yes.
a hope to be somewhere, to want something, and every parent has the same dream for their children to
Yes.
be somebody. So when you're killing something, you're killing the hope, you're killing a person, and the whole experience of hope is also diminished in that killing. But that's not given credence to, because humanity is not factored into that. So.
As a last question, dear doctor, thank you very much. You spoke about Rwanda and the Hutus and Tutsis. We have in Afghanistan also some ethnicities or ethnic groups which are different, and some of the ignorance, if we are allowed to call them, they are dehumanizing other ethnicities. What will be your message to our people, and especially for those who are working for the process of dehumanization other ethnicities in our country? What will be your message to them?
Yeah, so I think the first foremost thing is, because you're looking at people who are already Muslims, so you have to use the most important epistemology, which is the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
The Quran, prophetic hadith, is the most important life-changing epistemology for them. Not other things. It's going to be what's already inherently true for them, which is the Quran. And of course, Allah made us as a people, not that we would pick up on these small differences in each other, but we would see them as وَمِنْ ayati, and from the signs of Allah. Allah made us, therefore, with differences, to say Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, that we would show marvel at Allah's creation and Allah's ability to create, as opposed to using these demarcations as reasons to overstep other and dehumanize and marginalize. So I think that if you have, for example, tribes in Afghanistan, it's very important for them to know about Rwanda. I think that Rwanda, I have it as a chapter
Yes.
because I think it's one of the most remarkable cases of dawah in our time, in terms of the way that people's just decent behavior transformed the way that Christians saw Islam. And many Christians became Muslim, from Rwanda, because they would see the Muslims were the ones that saved our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important. That story should be told. I was once, I tell you why I wrote the book, the chapter on Rwanda. I was many years ago. I was in a conference in London about Islam in Africa, and so after my talk on Rwanda, because I was beginning to research Rwanda, you had Sister Lauren Booth. So Lauren Booth is a revert to Islam, and she was, I think, the sister-in-law of the old evil Prime Minister Tony Blair, the one who launched the wars in Afghanistan
Yes.
and Iraq, and his sister became Muslim, and she spoke after me, and she said it's very interesting. Brother Osman spoke of Rwanda. She said because I'll tell you why. She said because she said last week these two African sisters came after my talk on Africa or something, and they sat down. They said, Sister Lauren, we want to thank you for your talk on Islam in Africa or something. But we're from Rwanda. And we have the most amazing story to tell the world,
Mm-hmm.
but no one wants to hear it.
Mm.
Yeah, no one wants to hear it. And it really made me think deeply that we have to write about a book about Rwanda, tell the story about Rwanda, because that means that this transformed the landscape of Rwanda, because people could see Islam in a whole new light. Islam, of course, not just preaching to people, but it's showing things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that people who are in the same predicament and they have hostilities should learn about Rwanda. Should learn about, like, for example, one of the things I have in my book, I have, so academic research where they said that the Hutus and Tutsis and the Islam would pray together, would
Yes.
fast together. Like they had a common principle of existence in themselves, and this helped. That meant that the Muslims were not guilty at all on war crimes in Rwanda. No Muslim was.
Mm-hmm.
When the monasteries all locked their doors, mosques remained open because they wanted people to see that even though the Christians believed that the mosque was a place where the demons existed, because they had a fair stereotype, but that was squashed and quashed because they could see in the masajid, people would give them refuge and safety
Mm-hmm.
and protection, and these things are very important. So people should learn about those landscapes. Second thing is that Allah in the Quran, of course, is very clear about the fact that we are one people, and these differences are like Allah in the Quran says, "Shaitan lakum aduwan fattakhidu aduwa." Shaitan is an enemy to you. We have to know how the enemy works, what his arsenal is, what is trying to do. And one of the policies of Shaitan is to divide the people.
Yes.
And so the Prophet was very much against that. He saw once, he came inside a masjid and he saw Sahaba sitting in different places, and one person is doing dhikr, one person doing Quran, and each person. And the Prophet then says, "What is this division I see amongst you?"
Mm-hmm.
Sahaba, they said that if he came again and threw a blanket over us, all of us would be in the same blanket.
Mm-hmm.
When they understood the importance of unity, and even when people would say like names like Aus and Khazraj, like these two tribes in Medina, he would say, "What is this jahiliyyah? Ignorance
Mm-hmm.
I see in you. Allah has not made you these different tribes, and you have like the barbarians, like hordes, killing each other for these small things. Allah removed that animosity from you. And before Islam, the Arabs were like that.
Mm-hmm.
They would fight for small things, and Allah says, وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ وَلَوْ أَنفَقْتُمْ مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. If you spend everything on the earth, you couldn't unite their hearts. Well, Allah says we have united their hearts. And so Islam does that. Islam brings people together because it realizes that in akhirah, all these things will not mean anything. They're just dunya things to hold people as prisoners. we should realize that we have a more of an akhirah-centric approach towards things. One of the in the Crusades. So the first crusade was 1099. But before that time, before the years before 1099, you had Muslims who would fight each other. You had sects like the Hanafis fighting the Shafi'is, and you have the Atharis fighting the Asharis, and you have all these differences amongst them in Alexandria, in Egypt, in bloody Sham, in Syria. And so Al-Ghazali then writes his Ihya Ulumuddin, and he goes off from Nishapur, Tours, Damascus, Jerusalem, and he wanted to show that these divisions you have only weaken us as a people. And that's one of the reasons why the Crusaders could come in, because they see us as a divided people. And so remember that if they see you divided, they will pick up on the differences, and it will make you even weaker. When the Muslims had Spain, all of Andalus, that means all the states of Cordoba, Seville, Granada, Toledo, all the big states, all of Spain, in Muslim hands. Now, when the Muslims became divided, and each state became too powerful, like the governor became too powerful, it means the state wanted to show that they have autonomy, independence from other states, right? They have their own army, their own Baitul Mal, their own money. Now, when the Christians saw this in all the Christian states, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, Leon, the mountains, Galicia, Asturias, when they saw this is the right time, right, to make a crusade against them, because they saw division. And when they saw division, then they would go to one tribe, one common state, and ask them to pay them money to protect them against other Muslim states, right? So all these, this is called the Muluk al-Tawaif, it's called the party kingdoms. So they pay annual tribute to the Christian kings to protect them against other Muslim states. So what happens is that one by one, they lose everything. They lose Cordoba, Seville, all the big states have gone. All that's left is Granada. And Granada was, for a few years, it survived. By that time, all the states of Castile, Portugal, Aragon are too powerful. Muslims can't advance further because they've lost everything, because division has created this illness, sickness in people. So dunya is one, division is another one, and these two things are like the devil's temptation, for us. May Allah protect all of us.
Ameen. Thank you very much, dear Dr. Osman Latif. It was a pleasure speaking with you. I learned a lot. I hope our audience will learn a lot also.
Thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you.
Allah bless you.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.